thanks for joining us, and thanks to Resource and the city of Louisville for putting this on and bringing me in to kind of talk about uh, getting ready for the spring landscaping and perennial gardening, waterwise gardening in the spring. A little bit about myself. As I said, I work for Western States Reclamation currently. I grew up in the Colorado green industry, and I grew up mowing lawns. It's like the standard landscaper story as far as mowing lawns and gaining an interest in plants. Helping my mom with gardening and kind of growing into being curious about plants and irrigation and building a career from there. Going into landscape design school at CSU and going through a landscape architecture degree at Kansas State. So I've also worked in the field doing design build. So I've had a career with plants and irrigation, and a lot of practical knowledge from that. And one thing that's always been consistent, whether when I was growing up or now, just always being curious about how something goes in and how it lives and uh, how you can keep things healthy and alive and thriving. And one of my favorite things to do um, is just work in my family's front yard. My wife is a designer and landscape architect, and we've worked a lot together, and we're able to put together this front yard, and just spending time there and watching it come together is one of the things that I find joy in. And so a lot of what I'm teaching tonight or what I'm talking about tonight is just practical knowledge that I've learned over this career, and a lot of experience just in my own garden and things that I need to do and things I need to know that I need to do, and just share that with you guys and answer questions intermittently. And I have it kind of broken up, and if you're you currently have a garden and just standard maintenance and things to think about, or if you're thinking about converting turf and starting a new garden, what are the things that I need to think about? And uh, those are kind of some of the topics that I want to go through today. See. So the agenda overall is I've kind of broken it down into all the great things, which I was just talking about earlier. I wish I had some music to this too, but it's basically like kind of hype video about perennial gardens and um, perennial gardens and shoot, all the benefits that can come from them. Getting people excited about the gardening, the spring season, what we're doing, um, and kind of go through some basic facts and statistics with that too. Then I want to go into where did I leave my stoke. So not only do I want to talk about spring gardening, but like kind of what you need to be thinking about closing out one season and opening up a new season, and some maintenance practices that need to be going on, or that you could, or practices that you could be doing during the winter to be ready to start in the spring and take advantage of like the cooler planting season and getting your garden ready. Then we're going to come up on it's here, now what? So, okay, you're ready. Um, Spring is finally here. You're ready to get back out into the garden. Where do I start and what should I be looking for? Into happy surprises. Added this one, perennial gardening, especially in our front yard and just projects overall. Like if you have thick planting, you're going to have volunteer plants. You're going to have weeds, like how to handle that and what to be looking for, and just some advice there. And then time to scale, which is going to be more or less kind of about larger projects and things that are happening around the state, within cities, um, that are kind of scaling the thoughts of perennial gardens and low water use plantings and xeriscaping, and just some of my experiences there. And we can talk about that a little bit, and I can kind of share what I'm doing with my career and what the city's doing. And then I have a resource page, just some of my favorite sites that I was going to share with everyone. And yeah, then we'll open it up for some questions probably after where did I leave my stoke? And after it's here, now what? And then at the end of the presentation. So happy to be here. Can't wait to talk about these things. A lot of the pictures are from my front yards or projects we've been working on. There's also some just grabs of some really cool gardens online. So hope you enjoy the pictures and the information. Looking forward to presenting and answering some questions too. Kick it off with a quote. Gardens are not made by singing, oh, how beautiful and sitting in the shade. Um, I think this is just a nod of the cap to, a lot of work goes into making gardens, especially thoughtful gardens. Um, Whether it's the workforce or your own efforts, like appreciate that work that goes into it. And then what comes from it too. So sure, there'll be plenty of sitting in the shade, and if you do it right, there'll be more than you want. I mean, there'll be more of it, but there's an appreciation to like the industry and all the efforts that go into creating these programs that we're talking about, whether it's with the city of Louisville or other surrounding municipalities, um, or whether it's in your front yard, and the thought and the work that goes in that too. So I thought it was just a good quote overall for the industry. Now into all the great things. So if you're not doing 11 acres of like turf transition, but you just have a small yard like my own house, you can have a positive impact in your small plot too. And the more of us that get on board, that start reducing turf sizes, planting perennials or waterwise plants, and start paying attention to how you're watering your landscape, it can build up and make a positive impact. And it also impacts your money. It also impacts the people around you, your health, and it's just positive if you start making some transitions and planting these things and start thinking water wise. So I kind of wanted to go through these, starting with pollinators, um, and then we'll go into water use reduction, overall health, and then aesthetics and textures. 35% of the world's food crops depend on animal pollinators to reproduce. Um, there's research out there that these populations are on the decline. Some certain particular populations would be that, and just adding to your garden, and having a garden, reducing your turf, and managing your garden and your maintenance can have an impact on that. And you're benefiting, an overall good. And if we can put these together, then you can make a positive impact. These are picture of two pollinator heroes. They're my two sons. I have one with a pollinator box that him and his mom made that went in the garden, just a bee box that they made and activities for the family and just overall. Then I have my youngest son. He was trying to attract hummingbirds and dressed up and was trying to see if he could get one to land on him. So he's got incredible focus going on, and I got to tip my cap to him as far as um, the outfit and the effort that went into doing this. And again, like in the background is the picture of my backyard. We took some turf out. We had a small front yard. Um, Took out probably 2/3 of the turf and left a little bit just for framework. But we'll be talking about that and kind of the things that I did to move from turf and into more of a garden too. 50% of the water used by the average household goes towards outdoor uses, most of which goes towards turf. So that's a big percentage of all of our water use is going towards these turf grasses. And I don't know if this number is moving as I see more and more houses turning down the irrigation or putting in the garden in the box. Um, but it's a substantial number. And so, if we all get together, especially as there's more and more houses on the Front Range, and we start being mindful of how we're using that water in the outdoor landscape, or moving to rain barrels, and you can start moving that needle, and that really benefits you as well as far as the pocketbook goes, and especially as people go to tiered pricing, and also there'll be mandatory oh, what's the word? I've got a slide here. So there'll be voluntary indoor water use strategies, and then there'll also be outdoor restrictions. And so, getting ahead of it, reducing turf, being mindful of, where that water is going, and reduction is not only going to save you money, but it's also going to be, you're kind of future proofing, where if there is mandatory outdoor water use restrictions, you've got the plants that can sustain it, and you're kind of thinking ahead on the process. I'm going to go back to this chart though. And it kind of just outlines kind of where your water's going. I always find it interesting, and just to see how big of a piece of pie the outdoor water use is has in the overall water use, household water use. I know my water bill's gone up substantially, just with the tiered rates and how much we use. So I'm glad that we started planting and putting in xeric landscape. This is more my opinion, I guess I'm sharing, is but 100% improvements with colors, textures, and smells. I really enjoy having a colorful landscape and layers, and being able to see the insects and the birds that come into the yard. Um, so you're improving overall your plant palette and just the overall value of a house. Bring some interest into your yard and let it get a little bit messy. It is a messier look. It's not the formal mown turf, which I can appreciate as well. But having different colors and textures throughout the season, and looking on what's coming on next and going to bloom, and this time of year for sure, like just seeing the bulbs starting to come up, being ready to see, try to remember and be surprised by where the bulbs were, and what's coming up again, is always fun. And something you don't necessarily get if you've just got a stand of turf. This is kind of subjective too, but just it's a point to, working in the yard and being active in your yard and gardening can also benefit a person as far as burning calories. And I got this off the internet. I don't know incredibly how accurate it is. It probably depends on how much you're doing overall. And so it's a little bit subjective, but the idea of it is, getting out and gardening, being active, cutting back plants, checking irrigation. Those are all healthy habits to have too. And when I used to work in the field, uh, I did a lot of stonework at some point. I did a lot of flagstone laying, and I would think of it as reverse rock climbing as far as, being healthy and active, and it was always a fun way to get through a day and think about it that way. But I put this slide together just to outline like how subjective it is, probably depending on what you're doing. I mean, if you're not too active, like the guy in the back, maybe he's talking, maybe just 10 calories. If you're pulling weeds, maybe just 250, or raking or hoeing 180. But if you're power pulling weeds, you could be burning up to that 300, no doubt. But I thought this is just a fun slide to have and kind of outline what the stat was trying to say. There's a lot of other mental positivity that comes from the garden too, and I enjoy that as it comes on in the spring and throughout the summer, and watching our gardens, Waterwise and perennial gardens, come to life. But here's a point where did I leave my stoke? And I was thinking when I started putting the presentation together, it's about the spring and about what we can do in the spring, but also, you know, when you're going into that, you need to be planning. And there's also this winter period, and sometimes it gets forgotten about um, when you're in the mix. And I just wanted to bring to life some things that you could be thinking about in the fall and things you could be planning during the winter as you move towards spring. And I kind of broke these into the haves and the have-nots. So it's people who already have an established garden and the people that don't necessarily have one now, but are thinking towards making a Waterwise garden and kind of the different things you could be thinking about going into the winter and then heading into the spring. The haves, I'll start off. There's a couple of gardens by P. Udoff. If you're not familiar with his work, my wife introduced me to it. There's pretty amazing gardens and layers and matrix planning. Um, so you should check it out. Also, help with the stoke through the winter and also just get excited about low water use landscapes and the use of colors and textures and not just turf. But I'm going to go quickly through covering, dividing, and watering. With cover, we kind of talked about it a little bit already, but it provides habitat for pollinators. I pulled this fact off the internet, but 70% of Colorado's native bee species nest underground, the remaining 30% in hollow stems and tunnels left by other insects. So just the importance of leaving some cover, some leaf debris, not cutting back and raking up everything in the fall. One thing, I mean, there's a lot of beauty that can come from like the ornamental grasses and your perennials and your plants through the winter is one thing, but also it's contributing to an habitat for insects to overwinter and other critters too. Um, Overall soil health, having a cover on there, whether it's mulch um, or or material um, from the garden. It helps moderate the soil temperature swings. So you're not getting the extremes into the soil. You have somewhat of a blanket or a cover to help moderate that. You're getting some natural decomposition within the soils, which kind of helps break up the soil or helps build the soils. And then it also helps add to nutrients in the soils, leaving some decomposed matter within the soil and just the overall soil benefit. You're not losing soils either. So like keeping a soil in place, not letting it blow around is also just like a basic housekeeping. Moisture retention, reducing need for winter watering. One thing that sometimes gets overlooked, it's being taught more and more, but plants during a harsh, cold winter that's also dry, still would benefit from having water to their root systems, so you're not having dry, frozen roots. It's really important with trees or newly planted material. So if you're dividing or planting things either late in the season or close to fall, before it can really get roots out and going and established, it's important to keep an eye on those and keeping some moisture on them so they don't desiccate over the winter. So this cover helps with that and it helps hold the moisture in. And then winter interest. I guess I started on that one first, but yeah, winter is interest, like the different colors of grasses, or if you have the red twig dogwood, that's the famous one for having winter interest in the color in your landscapes. But our family keeps ours through the winter. We'll hold on till May to do like a full cleanup. We'll probably start cutting back some of the grasses or some of the stuff that starts coming out a little bit earlier here soon. But we enjoy the garden throughout the winter and seeing what the snow will pile up on it, all the different aesthetic features of it as well. In the fall, for those that have. Um, some symptoms of things that need to be divided would be no longer blooming, have bare spots or floppy, or have outgrown their space. You got to keep your eye on um, the spring blooming plants. There's a good time frame for fall dividing. And so you could be thinking about dividing and placing that into your landscape at that point in time. And then just a general note that, your summer and fall blooming plants are typically a good time to split those would be in the springtime. But just thinking about dividing what you need to divide, where you could be putting it, or if you need to be sharing it, something to think about in the fall as you're heading into the winter season. Watering, touched on this a little bit. Months with little or no moisture, you need to be thinking about, preventing root damage. Cold, dry winters can impact the root health. I'm usually looking at, woody material, trees for sure, new trees that are establishing or plants, maybe that you've just divided, as I had mentioned. And the days you want to hit it aren't the really cold days, doesn't make any sense. But, if you get the warmer days during the course of the winter, you have no snow cover, maybe you're looking at getting out there and giving your tree a little drink and maybe some of the newer plants in your landscape. Um, I have a lot of mature plants in my landscape, so I'm not too worried about the winter watering. But whenever I introduce like a new plant late in the season, or plant trees late in the season, whether it's for work or if it's in my own landscaping, I'm keeping an eye on it and making sure that I'm keeping it well watered. Um, Another one especially is evergreens. Um, you got to keep water on those through the winter, especially if it's really dry and they're new plants. And also be considerate of site conditions. So, if your garden has an exposure to wind or reflected heat, like keeping an eye on those areas, and those are more susceptible to dry out and also, to be heated up. They're also going to start coming out of the ones that are reflected heat are also going to break dormancy a little bit easier. Or earlier. So you got to keep an eye on those things. The have nots. So if you're heading out of a season, you're like, man, I spend a lot of time mowing, or I want to make an effort to reduce my water bill, or I really dig the neighbor's yard to put in a bunch of Waterwise plants or a garden in the box. I'd like to be doing that too. Start planning. Um, so start with design, like have an idea of what you want to do and be thinking about that through the winter, or have a plan. And you can also do an analysis of kind of what you have as far as irrigation goes, or um, where your drainage is, and it's different considerations of your landscape, and being thoughtful about that. And then you can also get started on some preparation. You don't want to get too far ahead and just strip your yard and have it bare through the whole winter. But maybe you can get started a little bit before spring on getting things stripped out, getting irrigation adjusted, and just touch on these real quick. With design, um, I want to encourage that someone start early on hiring or asking someone for assistance. You get into the springtime and the green industry and designers, and from experience or what I've seen, are already booked or getting busier, and it's harder to get a hold of someone. So if you start planning early and you ask for that help early, then you're more likely to get a quicker response. So that's one tip that I have. Brainstorm on how you actually want to use the space. As an example, we've taken out probably half of my backyard, but we left some turf because I have the two boys for playing and swings and football. Um, so it's important to have that space for them, but I also wanted to be mindful of like putting in gardens and enjoying that space as well as a gardener, and um, just trying to reduce the overall turf in the area. Um, Open to suggestions, be open to guidance. You might have your own idea of what you need to happen, but if you're seeking help and you're asking someone, like listen to those and see if there's like, be open to changing maybe how you approach something with new ideas. Sometimes you get stuck on an idea of like what you have to have, but it might be not be suited for maybe this area or suited for your landscape. And so be open to someone that has some experience on how they view your landscape or how they can help you in your own landscape. Examples are awesome. Like especially like around your own neighborhoods, and there's tons of like demonstration gardens. Um, it seems like a lot of towns have them now. Uh, but even just driving through the neighborhoods, you can see a lot of people using the garden in the boxes or just thoughtful ways to put together xeriscapes, waterwise gardens. So find those and point those out if you're going to work on them or use them as examples. Maintenance and renovation, care and grow what you already have. A lot of times just taking what you have and and being mindful of like whether it's an irrigation controller or the plant itself and how much you're watering it, and then just starting there, you can make a lot of impact with what you already have without making big strides to make big changes. Um, so that's just another item I wanted to bring up as far as design goes. So small changes can go a long ways, and you can build upon them. You don't have to do everything at once. Um, Analysis, um, taking an inventory of what you have as far as irrigation and existing plant material. So in the fall, you're going to head into spring. You want a new landscape. Know what you have as far as irrigation goes and be able to talk about it or adjust that. Um, know your existing plant material, what you want to keep, what you can divide, what you need to transplant. Soils. Soils are critical to all of this, to success. Um, taking care of your soils and knowing what your soils are. You could take a soil sample in the fall, and you could take it to CSU laboratory. It's down by the stock show now, but it takes like 14 days and you get an idea of what's in your soils. And you could probably get some recommendations from them or ask a professional as well to see if anything's needed or added, or maybe you have soil that's adequate and maybe it just will take some decompacting. But find out what your soil is and um, make that step in the fall and not wait until the spring. Know your different exposures, know your drainage, um, and also drainage can become an opportunity to improve. Uh, you can improve your drainage for one. Maybe it's staying too close to the walk, or it creates a slick spot, or it's too close to the house, or you can also even utilize it like in your garden. An example is at my house, we built like kind of a channel out of rocks and then planted next to that channel. So it has access to water throughout the season. Or you can make rain gardens where maybe they could see some more water and you could infiltrate a little water before it goes out. So there's different ways to think about that as well. And then upfront preparation. So the previous slide was this is actually my parents' yard. They had a front yard full of bluegrass, but it wasn't doing well. Um, and my dad was sick of the turf. I'm like, well, let's put some plants in it. He was on board, so we kind of came up with a plan, and there's upfront preparation as far as um, the demolition goes, knowing where the irrigation was and what I needed to do with the irrigation. These are some of the things you could do kind of ahead of the spring, um, or coming into spring. And then sourcing is another one. I know the garden in the box is super popular, so knowing when that timeline opens up, when it closes, trying to get ahead on what you wanted to order, um, so you're prepared and you have the material when you need it. And I think there's two windows, and maybe Ben could talk about this when I break for some Q&A, but um, when those are available and when they start and they close. But you know, just getting ready for spring. So those are kind of the thoughts on that. But I'm gonna go ahead and open it up to Q&A here for a few minutes, and then we'll jump into it's here and now what.
All right. Joe, you'd asked me originally to just ask these questions for you. Is that still something we're looking to do?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. First question actually is asking, what is a stoke?
A stoke. It's just slang for um, it's slang for being excited about something or having a high stoke would be an excitement. Um, like say if you're a skier, you might have a high stoke about a powder day up in the mountains, or if you're a gardener, you might have a high stoke about one of your plants blooming for the first time. Those would be examples. We have a yucca in our front yard and it doesn't always bloom, but when it does, it's got a high stoke level.
Awesome. Next question is asking, it says, we have quite a bit of water through our sump pumps during the rainy periods. And so they're asking if there's any restrictions on the usage of this water, as far as you're aware, based off city regulations, and if there's a best practice for using this water in your garden.
I don't know specific city regulations, or I don't know if they mentioned which city they're in, but I guess one thought would be like, where is it discharging now? And maybe there's an opportunity to utilize where that discharge is for planting or capturing momentarily without necessarily plumbing it into anything. Um, those are some initial thoughts. And like as the example I just brought up, like with the drain pipes, like we utilize kind of a rock channel and something sculptural and artistic, where we could take that water and we could use it within our garden. So I don't know where the sump's discharging or the quality of the water once it's out, but that might be an opportunity there.
Another question is asking about leaves that fall over in the autumn. When would be a good time to rake those up so as not to disturb nesting pollinators?
My practice is, or like in our yard, this is how we manage it. We typically will rake our yard off, and then any heavy piles within the planting areas. But we usually we leave a little bit of leaves, and we don't really cut back or any of the grasses or the other perennials. So there's like a pretty good cover throughout the garden. I would say just be mindful of you don't have to leave a foot of leaves, but you can kind of do a cleaning of the areas, um, a general cleaning of the areas, and then just leave some for the pollinators. And I'm sure there's additional science behind exactly how much cover or where they're nesting, but as a general practice, leave as much as you can until the spring, but you don't have to leave a foot of leaves in your garden either.
All right. Next question is kind of in a similar vein, asking about what kind of ground covers you might recommend for ground nesting bees and other pollinators.
Um, Specific for bees, for the garden itself, for your plants, I usually use like a small bark mulch. Um,
Any
there's also
ground cover
developer.
plants that are good for nesting?
What's up?
Any like ground cover plants that are good for nesting?
Oh, ground cover plants. I don't know that answer.
No problem. Uh,
No.
we got another one asking just about spring planting. What can we do now at this point and in the next couple weeks as we're entering spring?
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's what this next section of slides is about, like what we're doing now. So I've kind of
All right.
talked about like why to get excited about gardens, and then what you could be thinking about and planning ahead on. But so this next section, it's here now, and what do we do? We'll kind of cover those people that already have gardens, and then people that uh, also that are looking to install new gardens. So I'll jump into that, and that's kind of like the second half of this presentation.
Sure. Let's get a couple other quick questions before we go into that. We've got a couple people asking about resources for helping find a landscape designer or other folks who might help with this. Do you have any good places to point them toward?
Um, I think nurseries, like or retail nurseries, would be a good resource for people. Um,
Okay. Um,
that's a quick one that comes to mind.
awesome. Um, any recommendations for soil testing and where people can get that done?
Yeah, I use CSU Laboratories quite a bit. Um, and they're down at the stock show, um, where the old stock show was, or in that new plaza. And there's a new CSU building there. But if you looked up CSU soil analysis, their address and their different types of analysis would come up, and they're super friendly and would help, guide you to the simple analysis that you would need.
Mhm.
But something
I've got a few more
like
questions,
this.
but I know we've got a lot to get to. So if we want to keep going, I will try to get some more questions at the end.
Okay. Um, how about a couple more and then I'll get going.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. If we're ready, let's keep doing it. Do you have any recommendations for irrigation for a low water xeric garden?
Yeah. Um, I would go with point source irrigation. Um, and then you're not gonna have the overhead spray, um, which also works in a perennial garden situation, but you're getting the water to where it's needed, so you're not overusing the water, you're not losing it in a windy situation, you're not just putting it out into the air. Um, so that would be one thing I would recommend. We also use Netafim. It's a little bit trickier to monitor as far as maintenance go, and then to plant into in the future. But that's also it's like a tube that has emitters within it, and it's buried under mulch typically, or it can even be buried in the soil. So it's a little bit more hidden out of sight. So sometimes maintenance is a little bit trickier with that one, but with point source, and I have some pictures of it in the second half of this, you can get the water delivered exactly to where the water's needed within the root zone. And that's one that I prefer. And I know the crews that I work with also prefer it because they can see it and know exactly where the water's going and manage that a lot easier. Um, but in really densely planted areas, sometimes you'll see pop-up sprays. Um, I, I don't necessarily want to encourage that, but that is a way to effectively water an area as well.
We've got a couple questions asking about best practices for turf removal. Is that something we're planning on getting into, or would now be a good time to ask about that?
Yeah, I'm gonna get into that a little bit too. Yeah, so I'm just gonna kick it off, and then maybe we'll answer some of these, and then we can open up another Q&A towards the end, and I can get some of these shared,
That
some
sounds
more
great.
questions answered. Yeah, but thanks, Ben, for reading this. All right, so it's here now. What? So spring's here, and kind of what are we looking for, and what do we do now? So in a new garden space, there's kind of four different things to do here. The demolition, which we've kind of touched on, soils, taking care of your soils, amending if needed, checking your irrigation or putting, in this situation, you'd be putting in new irrigation, and then the plantings themselves. So sourcing and getting your plants in. Um, as far as demolition goes and like where to get started, um, especially if you're going to be working on irrigation and digging, or if you're actually going to do any deep renovation, always call in 811. Um, it's the best way to go. It's going to save you some pains, whether it's your cable or your neighbor's cable, or even you shouldn't be hitting gas or anything like that. But like call 811. Know where things are at in your yard. I can't emphasize that enough. Um, have cap or relocate existing irrigation under there. That should have gone under your underneath irrigation as you see it. But one locates is my one safety of safety talk of the day. Especially planting trees is another big one. If you're transplanting, say maybe you're going to open up a new area, you want to move a shrub because it doesn't necessarily work with the other plants, you want to introduce it. Choose a cool day. Make sure you get a lot of the roots, and I'll talk about division here a little bit. but you can take your transplants, get them out of there. And then you can do your sod removal would probably be your next steps. And the different methodologies with there, um, I've been a part of a lot of them, and I've got some new exciting ones coming up too, like on a larger scale. There's uh, the lasagna methods where you're putting brown material and alternating green material. And you're creating kind of like a solarized layer that's basically smothering existing sod. Um, it takes time. It takes resources to put into there. My thoughts on that are like maybe, what you're putting in there is maybe something that could be mixed in and help build the soil too. There's solarization where you're using plastic. I've also seen cardboard. I don't know the effectiveness of cardboard, um, or something that can heat up and then bake the existing vegetation underneath it. One thing that we've done and we've had a lot of success with is just like standard sod removal. The picture that you see to the left is a sod cutter. So you can get those and you can cut them. You can vary the depth on the sod cutting. Um, so you can remove your sod with one of those, roll them up. Um, on projects, we've just put it on the side after we've even taken sod off, and people have picked it up, posted it on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or wherever. And there's a desire to have that too, but getting rid of that sod and thatch, going deep enough to take out the sod, but not going too deep where you're stripping some of your topsoil too. So um, I like the sod removal piece. I've also been on projects where we've applied herbicide. Um, that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with the pollinators, and I don't know if it's needed for a smaller space. That's for larger commercial applications, maybe with limited ability to maybe use sod cutters because of roots or other items. Um, so there's different ways to get after it. I would say sod removal and then like a tillage practice is something that I would encourage, that I know that works. I know that solarizations work too, and I'm gonna be part of a couple projects where we're trying to scale that into like half-acre sizes, um, and then kind of see how that behaves and how you can scale that and how you can reuse it. And so there's some exciting things happening around that too. And then irrigation behind that. So, if you have irrigation already, you need to be mindful of where your irrigation's running. And if you're taking something out, like do you need to cap your irrigation so you're not gonna have a future leak? And then how you're gonna actually relocate your irrigation and get that digging done now before you're coming in and um you're starting to install your landscape itself. So having that knowledge up front and then also making sure you're capping it and taking note of where it is. So more into irrigation, you got to be selecting the type of irrigation going in. The different types of irrigation out there are point source, and the picture to the left or where my cursor is right now is a point source emitter. And they lead, I have the emitter on the drip pipe itself. So this is a lateral feeder, and then you have an emitter which gauges the amount of water coming out of that single spot. So you can adjust how much water each plant's going to get by how much emitters you're putting on them or the size of the emitter that's going out. And then the point of it is to get the water to the root zone of the plant. Sometimes you use two, maybe a smaller plant that has more concentrated roots. You can use one. Some trees you can have up to four or more, just depending on the tree. And those can be added or capped over time. So it's pretty adjustable if you pay attention to it and you want to work with it and you want to dial it in, like you can really dial it in. The inline drip is something I discussed. So instead of having the individual emitters, you'll have a equal spacing. So maybe every 18 inches, you'll have a half-gallon emitter as an example. And so you have like this really very gridded um, uniform watering. And you can plant into that, and the idea is that it goes down and then it spreads within the soil profile. Um, Usually those would go like on 18-inch on its center, or there's different spacings on those, and you would plant in between them. So like a really compact planting project, you could use those. The only one thing that I consistently hear from maintenance and just overall experience is sometimes it's hard to track what needs to be maintained, or if something got sliced, or it might go uncovered for a while because you don't necessarily know where to check. There's pop-ups. That's kind of like the older sprinkler where you're seeing it pop up and then a finer mist is sprayed out. Um, they're effective in landscape beds. If you're putting in perennials and Waterwise landscaping, you might be looking at like a taller pop-up. So if you're going from a turf grass, which would be like a 4-inch, you'd be going to like a 12-inch so you can get spray over plants, and also be cognizant of how you plant around those. Um, those aren't water efficient, but they have pop-up rotators now, which are more efficient. It's more of a stream of water rather than a spray, so you're not losing as much to evaporation and wind. And then just standard rotors are like when you're irrigating a larger space. So maybe we're talking about watering a native landscape, like maybe a seeded landscape at that point, and covering large areas. Maybe you're throwing 50 feet to establish some native grasses and some um, forbs and perennial species. Um, but thinking through like when you're doing irrigation, like the height of what you're watering, the spacing of your heads, and the efficiency of it. And if this is all a lot, then yeah, find those designers. There's different vendors around. There's a lot of different landscape companies with knowledge as well, but um, vendors can usually point you in the right direction, like being CPS or DBC or Site One. Um, those might be wholesale companies, but you could always ask them if they have a recommendation. They would know the people around you. Zones. You can zone your irrigation system. For instance, in my front yard, I have a drip zone for my perennials and shrubs, and then I have a pop-up zone for my turf grass, and then in my larger areas in my back, I have rotors. But on the turf, the small turf grass, I have one zone dedicated to that, so I can water that differently than in a different amount of time rather than the drip system, which I would water differently. You try to keep it on similar plant material. And if you're going through it, you can start thinking through how you would zone something, or how you would need to, what would be the best way to water it. So if you're grouping your plants into hydro zones, or maybe you're watering your trees on a zone, like you can start dividing an irrigation system into these different zones to water. Um, Repairs and modifications, um, do them now. If you're demoing your yard and you've got it all opened up, make sure you get all your fixes and everything up to speed before you start covering it with something. And then irrigation schedule. Man, it's the crux to this whole thing. I'm gonna throw a light on real quick. It's the crux to the matter. You could do all you can to have the most efficient irrigation system. You could zone it, you could have the emitters on, you could put pop-up rotators in instead of the sprays, and you could reduce your lawn size, and you're gonna save money, and you're reducing water use overall. But if you don't take your schedule and you don't take an active role in making sure your schedule is correct, you might not ever see that savings because you could be overwatering um, more than the plants actually need. Um, and plants will take the water, but you just have to be mindful of, okay, when is it too much or when is it too little? And um, like make sure you've got the programs running correctly. And if you're getting wet weather, you're turning off the irrigation clock, or if it's cooling down because it's fall and you're coming out of summer, maybe you can reduce the time. So if you're not taking an active role of the irrigation schedule, then then you're probably overwatering. And that's something to check into. If you don't have irrigation at all and you're just watering by hand, more than likely you're pretty in touch with um, on what's going on, and you're watering probably more in line with what the plants need. Um, so just be mindful if you have the tools of irrigation, you have a system going, like be mindful of how you're actually watering. Soils, can't say enough about soils. In my work, I do, especially land restoration or coming in behind, large civil equipment, like the decompaction and taking care of the soil, is so critical to actually establishing anything. Um, Actually, even before that, like knowing where the topsoil is, topsoil starts and stops, um, the soil that would support plants the most, making sure you're salvaging that and then you're placing it back, and you're not just burying that soil or you're just compacting the heck out of it. But making sure you're taking care of the soil resource you have. Decompaction's huge. If you're working or trying to grow something in a compacted site, um, it just doesn't work. You might get a kickstart, but over time, it's going to show itself. So if you're starting a garden, make sure you're decompacting. Relieve that compaction as deep as you can, whether that's rototilling or just turning it over. Um, I can't say enough about how beneficial that is. You don't want to overwork it to the point where you're just destroying the soil structure too, but make sure you're taking the compaction out of it. Another thing is don't work frozen or muddy soils. If it's muddy or frozen, um, it has a negative impact on the soil structure, and it's going to take a while for it to either decompact or take the clods out, or like everything to build back up. So be mindful of that. Topsoil and amendment. In the situation, like with my father's front yard, we brought in new topsoil and we kind of created a berm. So know where you're getting your topsoil from, and knowing where you're getting amendment from. Um, your soil analysis can help guide that information in that direction. And so um, there's a chance that you might not need amendment, or you might need quite a bit of compost to kind of to help, if it's a sandy soil, gain soil retention, or help break up a heavy clay or a compacted layer. But know where it's coming from too, and like pull the soil analysis. And I think I talk about amendment a little bit later too. So um, I'll go do that then. And then weeds. Know where products are coming from and get a handle on weeds. So don't just take any manure or compost. Um, I'd use a reputable source that know that you're getting a compost and you're not introducing additional weeds into your garden. Um, one tool I use is A1 Organics has a resource like an analytics page. And A1 Organics services quite a few of the vendors around the Front Range too. So um, it's pretty accessible, and you know what you're getting. And I'm sure there's other vendors out there that also have an analysis of it and can talk to you about their product. But the moral of the story is like get the information and know what you're putting down in your garden. Um, and then planting. So you've taken care of your demo. Um, you've called 811, you're safe. You're you're going in and you're taking care of the irrigation that matters, or at least getting it started and capped. You're going in and you're getting your soils worked, and now you're into the planting phase. And one thing with planting is I want to say is like size does matter. Um, bigger plants have like a bigger impact right away, but smaller plants also just um, thrive and kick butt, and they're not as expensive. And so, if you are keeping an eye on your plant material and how you're watering it and you're taking care of them, helping them get established, smaller plants are going to save you money, and oftentimes they're going to establish quicker and then catch up. So You don't necessarily need the big containers to get a garden going. There's different sizes out there from 4 inch to 1 gallons. Um, I don't know. I would never recommend like planting a 5 gallon plant because a 1 gallon will size up so quick if you're treating it correctly. So that's just like uh something that I want to just an opinion that I have that also, it could save you money and also save you time. You're not digging as big of holes when you're planting the smaller plants either. But on the left is a picture of us putting in some plant material. You can see the drip line emitter here, or the drip line itself, the lateral, and then we were punching emitters in and bringing the water to the plants. Um, but when you're planting, definitely dig a larger hole than what the plant you're putting in is. Um, I typically amend the backfill too, if amendments needed. So kind of mixing in maybe 1/3 of a compost or into the soil, and then 2/3 of the native soil and bringing it back to the plant. Make sure there's no air pockets within the plants. So, whether it's watering it in or, kind of lightly packing it with your hands, the air pockets kind of create an area that could desiccate the roots and impact the plant. Same thing on trees as you go up, like from a small plant to the bigger plants. Dig a bigger hole for the plant so it's decompacted. Help it with the amendments and also backfill within it. So, um, friend status, man, if you can see if a neighbor or friend has some plants that might need dividing. So if a neighbor, like maybe one of your example projects that you've got inspiration from has plants, maybe they're dividing and maybe you can capture some of those divisions and utilize some of their garden too. And just a real cool sense of community and seeing a shared garden and being part of that. Um, and then planting, I've said it a lot of time, get modifications ready for the spring planting. So um, starting to look into, getting everything, the sod stripped, the irrigation done, and getting to that point. Um, One thing to think about though is if you're planting, typically we like to time planting with irrigation turn on, which is, kind of the May time frame around here with our smaller backflows. You have to be really careful of when you turn on though, that you're not getting freezing and you're making sure you're draining that if we do get one of those late freezes, hard freezes. But I would, if you have an irrigation system, kind of time your planting with like when you're going to turn the irrigation system on and be thoughtful about that. If you're not, and you can source the material, um, you can plant. I mean, once it starts warming up here a little bit more, I would say we're starting to get into a planting window, like in late April, May. Some of the flowers and plants are finishing still, so they might not be available till a little bit later, which is fine too. But it's just a matter of keeping an eye on them and making sure you're taking care of them. This is the front yard planted out in the turf area, the once that was turf area in my parents' yard. So we brought in plants, a lot of 1 gallon material. I, we've got manzanita, we got some penstemon, some zauschneria, um, and then a Texas red oak. But you can also see kind of the bones of it. I had to convert the front yard area from pop-up sprinklers and then into a drip zone. So I had to change the valve itself and then change that zone into a drip or a point source that would water the individual plants. And so you can kind of see the emitters heading to the different plant material. And then this would get a mulch um, coming in afterwards. So in an old garden space, say you don't have a new garden space and you're not or adding to it, um, you're looking to you're starting to cut back, you're doing an irrigation check. Once you've cut back, it provides opportunity you're looking at things that could be divided, those summer and fall plants. Um, and then you're also looking at maybe amendment if it's needed. A lot of the native material or waterwise material won't necessarily um, need amendment, um, or not even prefer amendment to be truth. But these are the opportunities for an older garden space, like come springtime. Uh, Cut back. So ornamental grasses, early spring prior to cool season green up. We're starting to cut grasses back now, but not necessarily doing like the full cleanup. Um, we're trying to get ahead, especially like some of the cool season grasses. Um, Trying to get ahead of before they start really coming up, and then you're cutting too high or you're leaving a lot of dead. You're trying to keep those, I don't know, cut 3 to 4 inches off the ground, get those cleaned up now and get them out of the garden. Um, how low can you go? You don't want to remove down the plant's growing points. uh, do the research or be conservative. The picture you can see like the dead standing stalks and then the plant material underneath it. So, taking back those stalks, the dead plant material back to the green is typically a good move. Or you can kind of tell when, the ornamental grasses, you can see the grass coming up and it's safe to cut those back. And if you catch them early enough, and you can look back and if you see buds or live stems, then you can be conservative on that or look them up real quick to see where you cut back to. um Perennial bloomers, consider deadheading after spring bloom for an extended season. So sometimes like with our valerian or Jupiter's beard, that'll come on early, and if we deadhead or cut back, we can get another bloom out of them. um, there's a lot of plants. You'll just have to look up the individual ones to know which ones you can cut back and try to, get another bloom out of or extend that season. And another one is tree care. I also want to be like always observant of the trees in your yard and their tree health, because they can really impact your garden over time. If you're not taking care of a tree and you have to take it out and your garden's used to a certain amount of shade or a certain amount of sunlight. So think about the trees, and maintaining trees are such an awesome resource and great to have in your yard. But sometimes we often look, just their general care. So whether that's winter watering or if that's maybe um, just some structural pruning throughout the season. Take care of the trees because they're a critical part of your garden too. Irrigation checks. So once you've got your garden cut back, um, you've provided yourself an opportunity to kind of go through all your irrigation, checking for leaks, um, making sure the emitters are actually still pointing to the grass, to your plants. Um, I have the two boys running around, so the drip emitters are always getting kicked out of place, and so there's like a good time to like turn it on and check, make sure everything's going where you want it to, and watering properly. And if you have leaks, address them now. Um, One, they're probably going to get worse, and two, you're like, over time, you're going to lose that water. You're losing money. So take this opportunity before everything grows in and covers it up to get these fixes done. Um, Coverage, drip, point source still pointing correctly. Netafim, like I said, sometimes that's hard to track, but like just keep an eye on your plant material, especially as it starts heating up and you're playing out spring into summer. You can kind of see if there's a zone or something's, like smaller plant or stunted plant material, or things are looking dry in a certain area. You probably have a leak somewhere along the line that's impacting the coverage on that. Um, Pop-ups, if things are coming up out of the ground, you can always obviously check their pattern, make sure the nozzle's fully open and it's uniform, make sure that it's tracking correctly over the space that you want to water. And then the clock again, already stood on my soapbox there, but time is money. Check your clock, make sure it's watering right, check back in with it. As you transition from spring into summer, you're gonna have to increase some times. Um, you know, add that time, be conservative, and then add a little bit more time. And then when the fall comes around, know that you're backing back off of that. So, um, and another thing with the clock is if you are changing, like say from pop-ups to point source emitter, the amount of time you run and how you run your clock is going to be different. Like point source, you could be watering for an hour long to deliver 1 gallon of water. Whereas like a pop-up, you're probably watering for only 12 minutes. So you got to adjust those clocks as you adjust your system as well. As far as plant division goes, some tips, tricks, pick a mild day, use sharp, clean tools. It's like plant surgery. I said, don't hack away at it. The roots are important, so don't skip on the size. Like take a good amount of roots. Make sure you're not just skimping on the roots themselves because that's where everything's going to come from. Another thing is like, so if you do have like, say an ornamental grass and you have like a dead spot in the middle or whatever, if it's a perennial, if you're dividing that, don't be taking the material or don't take the material out of the center where the roots may have desiccated or aren't as healthy as the sides, like be specific on what you're taking and be observant of what you're taking and doing. Eliminate air pockets when you plant things back. Like I said, that if you've got air in there and it's not got good soil contact, it's not getting its nutrients and it's got exposure to air, which is going to dry it out, which isn't good. And then keep some extra care on them. And this is true not only for the divisions, but like if you just planted your yard and maybe you have point source, um, it's not necessarily going to water that entire that container, like the new container that you just put in your yard. Give it a little extra water for those first 4 or 6 weeks and make sure it's keeping the moisture with it. Those little, it doesn't have roots yet that are out into the soil profile, so it's not taking advantage of its full space. So you want to make sure you water it and get good water to it so it can start to establish. So keep an extra eye, keep an eye on it for those 4 to 6 weeks. Oh, here's an example of a friend. She came over and it was a pretty mild day, and we did a bunch of divisions in our front yard and backyard. And this is her garden. It's like a border planting in her backyard. So it's fun to see. It definitely works. Good way to share plants and just you know, um, get to share part of what you've worked for and see it in someone else's yard. It's fun to be a part of. And like a note here is like a maturing front yard. Our front yard is definitely maturing, and it's changed over time. We've added things. Things have seeded. It's gone a little bit wild. Um, so we started dividing it, and we need to divide even more. There's a lot of work out there to do, but it's fun to share it and then be able to share it and expand it and then watch it change and we'll rein it back in. That's just gardening, like just the fun part of it. Amendment, I talked about this before. There's different types of amendment. Compost is a great choice for amending the soils. There's different organic fertilizers too. We use on like larger restoration projects. Um, Maybe are a little bit more cost effective than compost on a large scale. There are inorganic fertilizers. I don't use them a whole lot. There's a lot of organic fertilizers we use before them. There's usually like a strong flush of nutrients with the organics, and if you're trying to establish something, that might be appropriate on container plantings. Um, but as far as like seeding and things like that go, that we typically go to the organics or a compost, which also helps build the soils. I put down A1 organics. I know they sell a lot of like the retail markets, like the larger retailers like Pioneer, but there's a lot of good local stuff too, I'm sure. Just make sure it's composted. Know that there's not weeding material in there. So ask questions if you're buying a compost. A lot of the bag compost, you're probably safe to know what's in there, and they all have labels too. So just be aware of what you're adding into your garden. Um, Application on an existing garden is side dressing. So, kind of bringing the mulch away from it, away from the plants, side dressing like a compost. Um, I've in the past of like taken a hori and kind of worked it in a little bit, and watered it in. I don't know if that's necessary or not, and then get the mulch back up around it, but not necessarily around the stems. You kind of want to keep it away from there so there's not root rot or stem rot and the moisture is away from there. Um, and maybe there's no need. Maybe oftentimes like the plants themselves they are just low nutrients is fine. It's not a big deal. Um, so don't go through the effort, especially if it's not needed. I worked on a project down in Pueblo once, and it was, you know, hundreds of acres, and it was the poorest soil, but we were trying to establish a native landscape. And one of the botanists we were working with is like, no, we don't need amendments. Like we're gonna use different varieties of blue grama here to help establish this, and we don't need to add a lot back into it because we're gonna create this native environment, and we want the grasses that are going to survive without it. And, it was a very successful project, and just having that mentality of like you don't always have to amend something, like look into it a little bit and see where you need to go. Sometimes it's great and beneficial and needed, but just kind of learn a little bit about your plants and know your own garden. Happy surprises. So volunteers, managing volunteers, cut back early. We have like an ornamental thistle in our yard. We also have echinacea in our yard. And every year I tell myself like, man, I'm gonna cut those off before they actually go all the way to seed and get worked into the mulch and the grasses. And every year I fail to do it. We leave them on. They're super cool. Like in the late fall, they kind of get fluffy, and um, the blue fades to more of a white. And then next thing you know, they're dropping, and then I'm like, I did give up. I waited too long again. And so in the springtime, I'll have all kinds of these volunteers in my garden that I have to take care of. Um, so one way to solve that is in the fall or late summer, I could cut the heads off, and then I'll bag them and get rid of them. So I'm not fighting it every spring, but I must like the exercise. Um, Pull it after spring cut back. So after we cut everything back, maybe in May, we're getting in there and doing like a full cleanup, watching for bulbs and new plant material. But doing a full cleanup after, pollinators let them over winter and then everything's warming up. Then I'll check all the irrigation, and then I'll start pulling these thistle, which have an amazing root, and the echinacea. So trying to keep uh, trying to keep it transitioning from just all of these plants, like just a full echinacea. Um, so just working on that, or if you're mindful of it, like maybe you want some new air, maybe you want that in the garden there. Maybe you want it to go a little bit wild, and that it's your garden. Like you take care of it however you want. You gotta stay on top of it as far as weeds go. If you get in there early and you have like an appropriate mulch cover, we use like a mini bark almost, um, which seems to work really well. And we have good coverage, and we do like one weeding in the spring, and then we kind of just stay on it intermittently, going out there and pulling weeds. But it's really not a large problem in our garden. And I think it's just, we do the one big spring cleaning, one big cutback, and then just kind of keep an eye on it. And then relax is like, hey, maybe it's a good thing. Let some of the volunteers come in and see what happens. Just relax and enjoy the garden. And then neighborhood kids, can't say enough about it. If they're around or you have your own kids, man, garden's a blessing to have for maintenance and pulling weeds and being a part of. And um, yeah, hire them. This one's called It's Time to Scale. So this is kind of like more or less a nod back to like what I'm doing with Western States and some of the larger projects. Um, this one was actually in conjunction with my wife, and it's the Lafayette Fire Station #1. It's a Waterwise demonstration garden. It used to be all turf, and it was converted to this Waterwise garden, using xeric plants. There's different turf alternatives. So there's like a blue grama panel. There's a buffalo grass panel. So people know low water use options for turf. There's a low grow mix. But they also use like a bunch of garden in the boxes. And so you can go out there and see what resource has as far as like garden in the box and the different plant material, and there's labels. But it's scaling on a larger side, and Lafayette and a lot of the towns around here are doing this, like converting um, sod that's just eating water that might not be functioning into these gardens, and demonstrations on what we can do. And it's a really cool thing. I'd encourage stopping by this one or any of the other ones that are in our communities. You're seeing more and more of them, which is super cool. This is platform open space. A lot of what I do utilizes seeding. And then within the seed mixes, you have warm season, cool season, forbs, and then you might be interplanting with container plants, or you might be using 10 cubic inch tubes. A lot of the wetland material in here coming out of the drain is actually started out as 10 cubic inch material. Um, whether it's Perry grow grass or bulrush. And then within this specific area, I don't know, this is probably 8 acres of area. We had we had wildflowers in the mix, and man, they came on, and you can see the blanket flower in this picture, and it just made for an incredible space, which also functioned as like a critical drainage way. And so you're seeing these projects going on in Denver and the surrounding communities, whether it's Westminster or Louisville or Lafayette, and being introduced this on a larger scale is fires. It's pretty cool to be a part of. Oh, I want to give a nod to Stream. They and Matrix, they helped design this park, and then Denver Parks themselves, and then ECI's construction. This is City Park Nature Play. It's down in City Park in Denver with the Nature and Science Museum, a new nature play they put together. Again, we use seed mixes and a mix of plants, smaller plant material and larger plant material, to kind of put together these bigger, larger scale projects. Pretty fun to be a part of around the communities. Great places to get ideas. And with this, like ECI, dig, landscape architecture, uh, the museum itself, city and county of Denver. All credit to like getting this project off the ground, and working to introduce like these pollinators in native areas. Last slide, it's out there. Just some quick resources. I'll leave this one up. Obviously, Resource Central is it's incredible. There's so much information out there. There's the garden in the boxes, but there's all kinds of different information about Waterwise and plants in general. CSU Extension is like one of my go-to resources as far as finding out information about gardening or compost or winter watering or whatever it is. Like it's an incredible resource, local resource that you guys can use. It has a lot of applicable information. So I wanted to share that. Same thing with Colorado Springs Utilities. The information's out there. I'm probably overlooking a ton from other municipalities and other things on the Front Range. These are ones I often go to. I found the demonstration gardens link. It has all these different plant select demonstration gardens with information on them, and there's a ton of them. So I'd encourage you to go find those and actually go to these gardens if you've got ideas or you want new ideas. And it's just a pathway you could take. And then I just cap off to my Wild Ride Design. That's my wife's company, and she just a lot of this design work and a lot of what was happening in our yard and the plant materials, like a nod to her design and thoughtfulness. And yeah, just acknowledgement there. So with that, I got 5 more minutes for questions, or a couple more minutes, and Ben, if you wanted to kick that off.
Yeah. We've got quite a few questions. We'll get to as many as we can, but unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to answer all of them. One thing I've noticed is we're seeing a lot of similar questions, so I might just ask just some kind of general questions that hopefully will touch on a lot of these. A lot of folks are asking for a bit more specific guidance on when we're going to start cutting back. Is that, as soon as it starts to warm up for a couple days? Is there like a certain date that you recommend?
Yeah, I think right now, I mean, you could probably start cutting back grasses and start working in on your garden. I wouldn't necessarily rake the cover off of your garden, like if you've left some of the cover and some of those plants, but like, some of the, I think Carl Forster is a cool season grass where you're going to start seeing that start coming up. You're going to want to cut that. You could start cutting that back now. But I'd say like in mid to late April, you could start getting in there and start cutting things back. And then in early May, maybe you're doing the full cleanup and bringing all the material out of the garden, and leaving an opportunity for it to warm up for the pollinators, like I mentioned. But um, and then that kind of aligns with like when you're starting to turn on irrigation too. So I'd say late April, early May timeframe.
Great.
But if you're itching to get in there, um, you could start cutting back grasses or some of the shrubs and stuff like I don't know, blue mist spirea can be cut back, and you can get in there and start gardening and chipping away at it.
All right. We've also got quite a few questions about dividing and when to do that. Is now a good time? Is it too late, too early?
No, I think you're getting into a good timeline. I think again, like into April is um, before things really start pushing back out. Um, so early spring, early to mid spring, like going in and taking the summer and the fall bloomers and dividing those. Um, we're in a good window. Um, and then as far as like a rule of thumb, like I keep saying, like you're not dividing the spring plantings now. You're definitely never want to divide something that's like about to flower or flowering. So you kind of keep an eye on that. But if it's just starting to push some green stuff and it's warming up, but most of the energy's still in the roots, it's safe to divide it and just choose like a cooler day and then just keep an eye on it.
Great, thank you. I know we touched a lot on amendments and what to do when you're amending your soil. Aside from those amendments, are there any other soil prep things you'd recommend for, native low water gardens here in Colorado?
Um,
As far as like compost or fertilizers, or for these native plants, typically would the soil amendment be enough?
yeah, I mean, that's part of like getting or knowing your soil. I mean, if you have a soil that's supporting your garden, um, it's a big question because there's a lot of different soils around and there's like a lot of different scenarios. I've typically used compost in my yard, and like you can use like an eco grow compost, which is mainly like leaf based. It doesn't have the manure in it. Or you could use like more of a compost base that's been composted down. But adding that into your soil profile is typically helpful. Some native plants, if you're going like straight native plants, then you might not need to add any additional nutrients. But if you do have like compacted soils or really sandy soils, some of that compost amendment and getting it tilled into the soil profile will help retain some moisture and also add some nutrients into your back into the soil. Other things that we've used with success just on plantings in general, or mycorrhiza, and then also humates. Um, the humates kind of help activate the biology of the soil. They can also add some organic matter back into the soil. Um, and there's a real benefit to the plants from those two. Um, the biology of mycorrhizae, I can't speak to on a scientific level. But yeah, like with plant roots and with planting trees, there's definitely like a benefit you can get from those two as well. I don't use a lot of inorganic fertilizers. Um, I just within the native grass and native realm that I work within, I'd rather use the slow release fertilizers they're going to add nutrients over time. Um, Products that are like that. I use Rich Lawn on my yard, which is like a chicken manure. But there's also like Biosol and Sustain, which are byproducts, but organic and slow release.
All right. Hopefully got time for another question or two. We've got a couple of people asking about soil amendments and how deep in the soil we're going. If there is it as deep as you can go, or is there a recommended depth?
I usually go like 6 inches, like top 4, 6 inches, work it in. If you're using a compost, some of them, like the Biosol or Sustain, is more of like a topical amendment. Um, so yeah, I'd say in that top profile of soil is like kind of where you're putting your amendment.
All right. We got a couple questions about pests and other weeds. If you've got experience in that, do you have any experience, working with mitigating bindweed or preventing Japanese beetles from attacking your garden?
I can't help with the Japanese beetle. And bindweed's a tough one. I have it on the side of my house too, and I kind of stay ahead of it, I pull quite a bit of it. I've also used like a hoe and like a hori hori, and that's definitely hard work. If you have large areas of it, I don't know a way to control it without herbicides, and even herbicide control is difficult to get a handle on it just because of the root system it has and its persistence. Um, I wish I had a better answer there, but I don't know. I don't know of like an effective silver bullet for it without just the labor work and just year after year, staying on top of it.
Another person asked about leaves as mulch. Is that something you'd recommend or something you'd stay away from?
Um, like I leave it as a cover. Um, One thing about leaves, like if you grind them up and there's like a thin layer of leaves across it, I think it could work. Um, I've never done it myself, but I would worry about like if the leaves dropped and you have like a thick layer of leaves and like it just the fact that it might smother whatever's underneath it. It might create too much of a layer and you might get some molds and some other problems underneath it.
Perfect. Last question, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Do
no
you have any
problem.
recommendations for wildflower seeds and where to get those?
I know vendors that have them. There's I gotta think. Arkansas Valley Seed
Mhm.
is a good vendor. I I'm pretty sure I've seen their seed at McGuckin's in Boulder. I'm sure if you reached out to them too, they could either provide it to you or give you names of where they have the seed. Um,
Perfect. Yeah.
but
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
there's other vendors. I just don't know if they're retail or not. I use a lot of wholesale vendors, which are like Granite Seed. There's Pawnee Butte Seed. There's Buffalo Brand or Sharp Brothers Seed up in Greeley. So there's a lot of different seed vendors. If you gave them a call, they could tell you where they retail out of, but they'll have different native seed mixes. But Arkansas Valley Seed, I know, is around, and they also like kind of have a focus on those pollinators too.
All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've reached our time. I hope you all enjoyed today's seminar and that you feel empowered to start using some of Joe's recommendations in your landscape this year.